Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Customer Engagement Lab. This is a very special Earth Day episode. If you are listening to this, we are super excited to have Professor Joanna Huxster from Eckerd College, my alma mater, in to chat with us about fixing your communication when it comes to your messaging, your tone, your positioning, all of the above, on discussing subjects where some folks maybe are hesitant or resistant to listen to you, like climate change. So you're bound to have a good time listening to this one, and stay tuned for a fun episode. For those of you who are new to this podcast, this is the Customer Engagement Lab, and over the last 45 episodes, we've looked at tons of different ways to attract and occupy human attention and interest in the business world. From sales pitches to advertising campaigns, everybody is screaming and shouting, "Look at me, listen to me, buy from me. No, don't buy from them. Believe my ideas, not theirs." I don't know why I use that voice. Anyway, when it comes to attracting and occupying human attention, there is almost no other area of life where it can be more ridiculous and frustrating to get people to listen and take action than in the world of climate change. That's because climate change is a problem that spans science, economics, law, policy, ethics, communication, the list goes on. And so for people who actually believe in science, which hopefully those listening to this podcast do, it's easy to understand that climate change is real and it's bad for our future. But for the general public and policymakers to actually get anything done is a completely different story, which is why I went on this long diatribe on an Earth Day special episode of our podcast. We're joined by someone who has devoted their entire professional career to studying the public understanding, perception, and opinion of environmental science. It's Professor Joanna Huxster from Eckerd College. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is so exciting. You're the first person from Eckerd to come on the show, and I'm really excited about it. Let's jump right into my very first question. That people are probably wondering themselves. Why should businesses or business people care about what an environmental studies professor has to say?
Well, are you a person?
Yes.
And do you live on planet Earth?
Yes.
Great. Do you eat food and drink water and breathe air?
Yes.
Then you should care about what an environmental studies professor has to say.
I love it.
Because you're a person, and you probably have myriad interests in living that are dependent on the environment. But if you want to be very specific about being a business person, there's basically no business on Earth that isn't going to be impacted in some way by climate change. And also, I think, I'm not a business person, but who is most important to a business person?
Customers with money?
Customers, right? Your customers care about climate change, believe it or not. Everybody's customers care about climate change. So you probably care because they care and you want to show them that you care.
I like that. That actually is a very good answer to speak specifically to what business owners care most about. I agree with you. I think everyone should care if they care about the current and future state of our environment because they want to live happy, healthy lives. But your research and career is really about human psychology, sociological communication, and effective persuasion, which is what salespeople, business people, marketers, they're all keen on understanding. But when it comes to their reputation, environmentalists don't always have the best relationship or reputation. Here is a parody clip of what it's like for some folks to hear about climate change. Are you ready to watch this parody clip?
Is it going to be a Greenpeace activist?
No, she's ridiculous.
Okay, good.
Hello, I'm from the government with an important message as we enter the third decade of the 21st century. Things are going, fine. Overall, the Amazon is fine, half of Africa is fine, so is the Arctic, Indonesia, Spain, Greece, even Greenland's on fucking fire. I mean fine. Scientists have coined a new term for this stage of climate change we're entering. We're fucked. Unlike the previous stage, which climate scientists called listen to us or we might be fucked, we're fucked is happening and in your lifetime. This is thanks to us wasting decades piss-farting around at climate summits with non-binding emission targets whilst handing out subsidies to climate criminals.
Okay, we can pause that, Sean. It just gets more ridiculous for the next 90 seconds.
Very accurate.
So I play this clip because as I was going through different social media videos and posts about climate change, people are frustrated on both sides, which to me, there shouldn't be two sides of this discussion. There is just one side. You either understand and believe science or you don't. But there does seem to be some communication problem when it comes to climate change. There was an article that came out from the Associated Press, I think earlier this week. It was titled, UN Warns Earth Firmly on Track Toward an Unlivable World. It's hard not to feel bummed out, hopeless, and helpless. What is your take on all of this?
Yeah, it is hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important to understand that if you want to talk about and communicate climate change, that the worst thing that you can do, believe it or not, is bum people out.
Yep.
And that's sort of been environmentalists and climate communicators and policymakers' first tactic, scientists, is to try to scare the pants off of people. And it doesn't actually work. You might get their attention for a little bit, but then generally what you end up doing is making them say, I don't want to look at that. This is too scary. This is too big. I can't fix it. So I'm just going to look away. Or you make them feel crappy for their choices and you shame them and make them feel guilty. And then they say, F you, I don't want to look at this. I'm just going to do something else.
Yeah.
So none of those tactics are particularly helpful. And it's hard not to feel that way because that's what most of the messaging has been.
Yeah. I can think about in my own, experiences of talking with folks, those emotions you just listed, they make me want to run away as fast as possible. The shame, the guilt.
Yep.
That's not a good way to motivate folks. Let's talk about, now that we understand what doesn't work in those communication patterns, what are some of the most effective communication patterns on this topic?
Good. Great question. So I think, well, first of all, I want to touch on one more thing that's not a good idea.
Okay.
And it's another one of our instincts. And another one of our instincts is try to continue to explain the science at people. And we've had science for decades when it comes to climate change. Scientists have been trying to warn us since the 70s.
Yep.
As the video said, we're out of the we will be fucked if we don't do something phase now. And so scientists have been trying to get us to do this, and we've had more science and new science and shinier science, and it hasn't made a difference. We've had incremental increases in public concern, but we don't have sweeping climate policy in the United States and in most places. And the international agreements, not so hot. So giving people more science at this point isn't getting us anywhere. But that's still our instinct, right? It's like, okay, you don't believe me? Let me show you another graph. How about this graph? How about that graph?
I'll speak to the logical side of your brain.
Exactly.
More and more and more, even though
it's shut down. It's not listening. It does not care.
Yeah.
And the reason is because even if you're not a climate denier, you have already heard the science and you've already moved on from it because you just need to deal with your daily life. And climate change feels really far away.
Yeah.
Even when they tell you, oh, it's happening now, you're like, yeah, but it's happening in the Amazon and I'm up here, right? So one of the best things that we can do to communicate about climate change is to make it local. Talk about the things that are happening here. Talk about the things that are happening now. Or talk about things that are happening to somebody like the audience. And that brings me to the other thing that's really important is to, in all communication, right, know your audience. Make sure you are speaking to your audience. What makes them tick? What's most important to them? Because chances are you can link almost anything to climate change. If they're really interested in the economy, climate change and the economy are heavily and extremely intertwined with one another. If they are really interested in healthcare, you can absolutely link climate change to healthcare. You can link the impacts of climate change to how public health is going to be affected, and you can talk about how the solutions to climate change are going to make public health better. And so it's really important to make it local, make it salient to your audience. Don't just talk about what's happening far, far away. Talk about what's happening to them now. And then you've got to counter that doom and gloom. And the best way to do that is to talk about positive futures. They always are saying, you need to bring in a solution, bring in your obligatory note of hope. And solutions are really important to be talking about, but you also have to help people see what the world is going to look like with those solutions. Why do I want a world with renewable energy? Why is that better, rather than just, we have wind turbines and that will fix it. Why will having a world powered by wind turbines be a better, cleaner, healthier world? And those are the types of things that get people motivated.
How do the best of the best convey their message? Are there specific maybe organizations or I think we can probably shift into some of like the examples if you have any of just like messaging that works really well.
Yeah. So one of my favorite climate communicators is Katharine Hayhoe. She's a climate scientist and a climate communicator. And one of the things that she always says is everybody cares about climate change. They just don't know it. And what she's talking about when she says that is that, again, you can frame climate change to be important to everybody. If you know somebody who works in agriculture, they're already being affected by climate change, even if they haven't made that switch in their head to realize that's what's affecting them. If you work with people in small businesses, their supply chains may have already been affected by climate change and they just haven't realized that that's what's happening. So everybody cares already. You just have to figure out what it is that makes that connection for them. The best communicators on climate change right now are not talking about polar bears. Any idea why a polar bear would be a bad idea? I'm quizzing you like I'm a professor.
I love it. I think because, like you mentioned earlier, polar bears aren't here. It's not local, so it doesn't really resonate with me.
I assume I can cuss on this show because I've already done it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nobody gives a shit about polar bears. They tell you they care about polar bears. They're full of it. Nobody looks at a sad picture of a polar bear on a melting ice cap and goes home and changes their whole life and goes out campaigning and joins Greenpeace. That's not what happens. Maybe 2 people, right? You look at the sad iceberg picture on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and you say, oh, that's so sad. And then you scroll to the next picture and you forget all about it. Nobody really cares. They're big, they're mean, they live far away, they eat people. Yeah. So polar bears make people feel like it's far away and it's not happening to humans. So that is not a great communication technique. And so the best communicators are leaving polar bears out of it, or they only use polar bears to be funny. And then one thing that we don't see a lot of and that works really well is harnessing the power of social norms. And by that, I mean our affinity for doing things that everybody else around us are doing. And we like to say we don't do that. I'm different. I'm independent. I don't care what everybody else does. But we all do it, which is why if you walk down a beach that has lots of litter on it already, you're much more likely to drop your own trash. Or if you get a message that 75% of people like you are already doing this thing, you're much more likely to do it. There was a cool study. Have you ever been in a hotel and seen the sign in the bathroom that says save the earth, reuse your towel?
Yeah.
So there was a cool study where they had one group of people got those in their hotel and the other group of people got the same sign, but it says 75% of our customers reuse their towel. And that group was much more likely to reuse their towel because they were being primed with that social norm that everybody is reusing their towel.
I feel like the guys from Freakonomics have talked about this concept.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to hear about it in this context.
It works.
It does?
Yeah, it absolutely works. And so anytime you can bring in a social norm, and that could just be as simple as making sure that if you get solar, that everybody in your neighborhood knows you got solar. And you can even say, did you know, 30% of the people on this street have solar. Isn't that really cool? You should join us. Harnessing that social norm, this is what we do here, is a great way to get people interested in taking those actions.
I installed security cameras at my house because I was the only one on my block that didn't have them.
Yep.
And I was like, and you're right.
You did it.
You're right.
It worked on you.
I was like, everybody else is doing it. I should probably do it too.
Yeah, it probably means we need that, right? Exactly. We got solar on my house and I'm so bummed because it's on all the inside roofs and nobody can see it. So I'm getting these signs to put in my windows there's solar up there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And just for the record, and on the topic of environmentalism, I did get to capture footage of an alligator walking up my driveway, which was super cool.
Also terrifying.
Is in the middle of the night, yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Wow.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I think something that happens in your profession and in the world of sales, marketing, and business is objection handling, right? So it's learning how to respond to folks who are resistant to questions like, hey, why can't the price be lower? Why can't we just fix this problem ourselves? Why do we even need you? Like the audience that listens to this podcast, they face that all the time. And I know when it comes to climate change, there's probably a lot of objections, but one of my favorites, Jon Stewart, has a great new show on HBO, and I did not watch this full segment, but I think he does encapsulate something here. So, Sean, let's go ahead and play this quick clip.
It's a wonderful place to live. So, judging from our first two soundbite packages, we're fucked. So that's the end of us. Is there anything we can do?
Small changes to your daily routine can reduce your carbon footprint and help save the Earth.
Reduce your carbon footprint. Cut your carbon footprint.
Stop doing things that leave a large carbon footprint.
Well, that sounds reasonable. How do we reduce our carbon footprint, thus saving the Earth?
Riding your bike to work instead of driving.
I'd love to help. I actually fly to work in a jet made of Hummers.
Very tongue-in-cheek, obviously, and this is an objection that we hear a lot, and one that I came across that I'm sure is a big one is that 70% of carbon emissions come from 100 companies, and there's nothing that the average person can do, right? Going back to this feeling of helplessness or hopelessness, how do you address that objection, and how do you think folks in your field can do a good job of handling that?
I'm really glad you asked this question because one of the things that we've been fed over and over again by well-meaning environmentalists, but also it turns out by oil companies, is the idea that your individual footprint is the best thing you can do to help deal with climate change. And you almost instinctively realize that that's bullshit, right? The moment you change all of your light bulbs, you're like, why hasn't the climate, it's still hot out. Like that didn't work. And so yes, it can feel good and be nice to do these things that lower your individual footprint. I'm a vegan, even though I know that my own contribution to climate change is infinitesimal, and that most of the worst things that I do are built into my system, and I can't actually change them with my behavior. So that is very, very disconcerting. And some of them seem like a real pain in the ass, like riding your bike to work. And so the sort of message that we've been given over and over again that we should be dealing with our footprint, worry about yourself, right? It's not real. There's a great podcast, actually, since you are in the podcast business,
Heck
you know.
Yeah.
So this one is called How to Save a Planet. And it was co-hosted by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Alec Bloomberg. Dr. Johnson is now doing something else, and Alex Bloomberg is still running it. But the episode that I'm talking about was called Is Your Carbon Footprint Bullshit? And they debated it. And they brought in Catherine Wilkerson, and they talked through this. And they did the calculation for how little your footprint matters. But what they came to at the end was that yes, changing your light bulbs and changing how you drive really doesn't matter that much, but that is a message, not just a thing that you're doing. And that is a message to all of the people around you about where your environmental values lie. And so doing that, you're communicating, right? If I just change my light bulbs and don't tell anybody, it's not worth much. But if I change my light bulbs and tell all of my students to change their light bulbs, I'm making a much bigger impact. And if I'm telling all of my students about the daily things that I'm doing, I'm making a much bigger impact because I'm helping them see what they can do. I actually had a high school friend call me the other day early in the morning, and I didn't pick up because I was like, what are you doing? But she left me a voicemail and said, please pick up. You're on speakerphone with my class. I was like, okay. So I called her back and I was like, what's going on? She's like, she's now a high school teacher. And she said, you're on speakerphone with 40 students. Tell me what you told, or tell them what you told me about beef and climate change. And so I told them, and now 40 students have signed a pledge to stop eating beef 4 days a week. And so your individual actions matter as much as you're spreading them to others. I think it's also important to understand that your biggest power is social, which is basically what I was saying, and it's, of course, political. You can organize people to come with you to vote and vote for the candidate that is running on climate policies. You can organize people to boycott a business or to pro-cott a business that is doing the right climate things. You can use your power of being a consumer. So we have so much more in our arsenals than I think we give ourselves credit for. The other thing that I say, and that my favorite climate communicator, Katherine Hayhoe, says, is the most important thing you can be doing is talking. If you look at how many people in the United States believe climate change is happening now, it's like 70-something%, which is great.
Yeah.
But then if you look at how many people say that they talk about it at least occasionally, it's like 30%. That's not many. How important can it be if we're not talking about it?
Yeah.
So the only way for us to bring this up in people's importance ranking is for us to be having these conversations, and most people are avoiding them.
Yeah. So it sounds like some of the strategies to employ here with handling this objection is some of the stuff that you talked about from the very beginning, like acknowledge, like, yes, it is like, it is, disconcerting that there's not much as an individual we feel like acknowledging, like, yeah, you're right. Like there's something there, that objection is valid.
Yes, your feelings are valid.
Yeah. And then the other part of it is understanding like the symbolism, and then going back to that social norm stuff of like what it is that you're symbolically communicating through your own actions.
Exactly.
And so if you're just going to give up, you're communicating that you don't give a shit.
Yep.
And that's, hey, okay.
Yep.
Have a great life then.
Yep.
Like,
Thanks so much.
You sure are a blast to be at parties with.
Yeah. I mean, people don't think I'm a blast to be at parties with either, probably, because I'm like, hey, how's that veganism going for you? And they're like, leave me alone, professor.
Would you say that there is like I think we talked a little bit about like this framework. We're getting closer to understanding like how people can get better at persuasion. Is it, going back to my days at Eckerd, we talked a lot about logos, pathos, and ethos. Is there a little bit more to it than, just touching on maybe somebody's emotion or?
I think that good communication and persuasion, although I sometimes hate to use that word because it makes it sound like I'm trying to sell people on something that's not real.
True.
And it's real. But I think that all of the best communication and all of the best conversations start with empathy. And I think we're missing a lot of empathy right now as a society on a lot of different issues, not just climate. But I think that when you have a climate conversation or a conversation about any of the number of things that we disagree on right now as a country, that being able to really listen to the person you're talking to, not come in there ready to fight them or scared that you're going to fight them, but come in ready to actually listen to what they have to say. I think that's the most persuasive thing of all. Because if somebody's not listening to you, you're not likely to listen to them. But if you feel like you're being heard and they are trying to understand where you're coming from, you're much more likely to give them a shot.
Yeah.
And so coming to other people as a human, I think as a human talking to another human is the most important thing we can do. And we all sort of need to take a step back and do that in a lot of places in our lives.
Disarm them with the empathy, meet them where they're at.
Yes.
Help them connect the dots so they can see how they are related to this problem.
Exactly. And if you understand where they're coming from, you're going to be much more persuasive in talking to them than if you're just yelling pre-canned facts at them, because they're going to put their wall up.
Yeah. I think some of the ways that I've approached it are in kind of funny, silly ways. So like one tactic that I try to have, again, coming at it with folks who I'm really not sure what their stance is or what they believe in or what they don't, and trying to feel the waters a little bit, is I'm like, hey, have you tried that Impossible Whopper?
Yes.
And they're like immediately like, yes or no.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's really good. Like, it's actually, you'd have no clue that it's not a cow.
Really good, by the way.
Yeah. and this is based off of like my true conversations. So I think coming at your communication style in a way where you aren't really sure what this person is, I think you're right. Like persuading and trying to sell somebody on something that, they may or may not believe in, it can feel tough, but I think it's worth the try.
Absolutely.
It's worth it. And we talk about this in sales all the time. Like, some of the best purchases I've ever made was because a salesperson was like, not pushy, but they were there.
Yeah.
And they were like, you're going to be okay. I'm going to help you get through this, you know,
Yes.
buying your car. I'm going to help you get through whatever it is, like buying a home, like these big decisions that you're trying to ride on is like, you needed that push from that salesperson. I think environmentalists, it's okay for them to push, and I push in the right way.
Right.
In a loving, gentle way.
Yes, yeah. And the other thing that helps, I think, is actually showing a little vulnerability. When people ask me, how do I start a climate conversation with somebody I don't know where they are? Humor is a great way. But another way is to say something like, you know, I've been really worried about this recently. This is something that's really worrying me. How do you feel? Because that already opens you up to them and makes that vulnerability will make them much more likely to want to engage with you.
Wow, I like that. I think if somebody was like, you're like, well, then
Okay.
this is a waste of my time, and I don't. We're not going to continue this conversation.
Okay, bye.
Okay, so I think this is a good place for us to pivot into my favorite segment of the show. Are you in or are you out? I described it to you in meeting up to this podcast interview. I'll make a couple of statements. I've got a whiteboard here. You're going to write numbers 1 through 4. I'm going to read the statements. You'll tell me if you're in or you're out.
Do I get to like explain my answer?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm so worried that I have to do a black and white thing here. Okay, I write 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll go statement by statement, and you'll write in or out or nothing or blank or question mark. There's no hard and fast rules.
Let me explain.
Okay. The first statement I will make, are you in or are you out? Recycling doesn't actually do much to help the environment and is a waste of time. Are you in or are you out on that statement? Number 2.
Wait,
Oh, okay.
I'm a slow writer. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Number 2. Focusing on the logical economics of a problem, such as climate change impacts the housing market, is a key to effective communication. I'll read it one more time. Focusing on the logical economics of a problem, such as climate change impacts on the housing market, is a key to effective communication. Number 3. Evoking an emotional response and having a psychological impact is the best way to capture someone's attention. Evoking an emotional response and having a psychological impact is the best way to capture someone's attention. And the last one, number 4. The number one thing a business person can do for the environment is buy PandaDoc and waste less paper. That's so really weird. I don't know how that one got in there, but...
Oh, no, I wonder how that one got in there.
You don't have to answer that one.
Oh, I'm going to.
Oh, okay. All right. So, number 1, what did you put down for recycling doesn't actually do much to help the environment and is a waste of time?
Do you want me to turn the whole thing around or?
Show the camera what you have. You wrote in for plastic, out on other stuff. Can you explain what that means?
Yes. Okay. So plastic recycling right now is basically bullshit.
Okay.
In the United States. It's something that we've been sold by oil companies who are also the ones who make plastic and the major beverage providers like Coca-Cola. To recycle plastic, you burn it. We usually burn it in places that are low-income communities or communities of color. It's real bad. Or we ship it across seas where they won't even take it anymore because it's so bad.
Yikes.
Causes a lot of cancer. Bad. Don't buy single-use plastic. Don't use this as a reason not to recycle and just throw your stuff in the trash. That also gets burned. Don't buy single-use plastic. Reusables. But for things like aluminum, that's very easily recyclable. It's a simple process. It doesn't have a ton of waste. That one's a good one.
Okay.
So some things you should recycle. Other things you should recycle if you have to, but just don't buy them. Don't buy plastic. Bad.
That is a really good answer. My coworkers, because I was like, guys, what should I ask? Like, Professor Huxster, and they're like, well, this is one we hear about and we don't know the answer to.
Yes.
So thank you for clarifying.
Glad. I'm glad that's helpful. I hope that's helpful.
All right, number 2, focusing on the logical economics of a problem, such as climate change impacts on the housing market, is a key to effective communication. You wrote mostly in.
Mostly in.
Okay.
I mean, you should always know your audience, right? Telling a high school student about the impacts of climate change on the housing market, Not effective.
Correct.
They do not care. But most people, if you are a homeowner, you care. Or if you're trying to be a homeowner, you care. So yes, I think that's a great idea for helping people see how it connects to them.
And I think you mentioned this, throwing more graphs at people and just trying to tap into the logic part of their brain and only addressing that, not effective.
Yeah, and you can use those graphs after you've got them interested. But if that's how you're trying to hook them, that's not going to work. Most people do not care about the graph.
Well said. Agreed. Okay, number 3, evoking an emotional response and having a psychological impact is the best way to capture someone's attention. Out on doom, in on hope.
Yes. If the emotional response you're trying to evoke is fear or doom, not a good way to do it. You might get their attention quickly, but generally what you're going to do is get them to psychologically shut down, because we all have a finite pool of worry, and we're worried about how we're going to get to the end of the day and pay our bills and make dinner and how many glasses of wine we can have tonight. So that's just not going to make the list. But if your message is about hope and exciting new things that we can do if we all just band together, you're going to have a much more positive response.
Again, going back, you said it well, avoiding triggering emotions like shame and guilt.
Yes, exactly.
Into, even if it's try to hook them, it's not a good way to do it.
Not a good way to do it.
Also, that what you wrote, I think you wrote Out, Doom, In Hope, sounds like a really cool album.
Oh, my next album with my band.
The number one thing a business person can do for the environment is buy PandaDoc and waste less paper. You wrote, you are using...
Are you using renewables?
Are you using renewables? That's a really good question.
Yeah. So if you are using renewable energy to power your computer, I'm in. If you're not using renewable energy to power your computer, which in Florida, probably only about 2% of your power comes from renewables unless you have solar, paper gets a bad rap that's not necessarily fully true. If you're using paper from, for example, that's certified by a third-party sustainability eco-label and 100% recycled, it's not bad to use paper. Not that, I'm sure PandaDoc does great work and makes things much easier and much simpler.
No, I want the honesty. I want us to learn, because that's the only way we're going to get better at this and talking about it, because, protecting the environment is essential and is really important to the people that work at the company and the company itself.
Yeah. Well, and computers and the internet and all of this technology is here to stay, right? But what we really need to be working on that front is things like right to repair and making sure that we don't have planned obsolescence. Because the real problem is when we are creating new computers every 2 years or new phones every 2 years, it's an enormous waste of resources that's entirely unnecessary. We have the technology to make your laptop work for more than 5 years or whatever, but we decide not to.
Yeah.
So it's has the possibility of being much more sustainable, but it's not really what's happening right now.
Gotcha. Well said. Any last advice for those who are trying to improve their communication, or any advice on the topics we covered today you want to just send home with everybody?
I know it feels like we're fucked, but we don't have to be fucked. You can do it.
That is the Customer Engagement Lab. Professor Huxster, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me.
This has been amazing, and you heard it here. You're not fucked. Tune in next week. We will have another episode of the Customer Engagement Lab, and we're always trying to get better. This is one way to do it. So thanks for listening, team.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Engagement Lab, brought to you by PandaDoc. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to hear from you and what you think of the show.